Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
And my name is Dyl, and today we have something very, very big to go over, and that is our first technical predictions for the year. But before we dive into that today, just remember, if you aren't subscribed, drop one down below, drop some comments, let us know what some of your bold takes are, because we're doing our very first tech predictions, so we could be a little bit all over the place. You may know something that we don't, so I would love to hear it down below.
So let's get into these tech predictions. Now, you might notice that every week we're dropping a different set of predictions, and we're going to do this on a loop all year long. So this is the tech categories. That means cinematography, editing, sound, and VFX. I'm going to take cinematography today, and I'm really excited to get into this because we haven't seen stuff from a lot of these films, but I'm really excited too, and I have really, really high hopes for the cinematography of a lot of these films and the visuals of these. This is always one of my favorite categories, truly one of my favorite categories, except last year. That was, they missed some things.
Looking at last year, the lineup wasn't awful. It's just when you compare it to what wasn't there was the problem. Yeah. It wasn't like they nominated bad stuff per se. It was just there was so much better left on the table.
There was no bad cinematography, but it was just questionable films. Like, why are you putting Empire of Light in there? So this year, let's hope that they get it right. And we'll start off with my number one predicted film, which is The Color Purple. I think The Color Purple is going to be huge. Dan Laustin is shooting this. He just shot John Wick Chapter 4, which people are shouting from the rooftops, give it a cinematography nomination. I disagree with that. We're going to get into that in our video on John Wick. I think it's very good cinematography. But Dan Laustin is someone that I think is just a fantastic cinematographer in general. He's got a great eye for lighting. He has a great eye for color in his work with Del Toro, in his work on the John Wick movies, and I'm sure in The Color Purple he is going to be the secret weapon to this movie being more than your average musical. Seeing his name on this movie instantly makes me more excited for it, and more hopeful that it's going to be really, really stellar, because you just know he is going to capture this film with the most beautiful lighting.
You could make the case that he is overdue because he is a two-time nominee both for those Del Toro movies of Nightmare Alley and The Shape of Water, where he was nominated across the board at almost every precursor that year. So I have no doubt that with The Color Purple, he will bring something amazing to the table. It's just, like you said, we're so far out, we haven't really seen much from these movies, but I think that's a very good movie to have at number one.
Well, and the director of the movie is Blitz Bazawule, who directs music videos for Beyonce, has a visual eye, has creativity in presenting musical visuals. So I think that tag team between Dan Laustin and Blitz is going to be something to behold. And in second place, I have Killers of the Flower Moon. Cinematography is done by Rodrigo Prieto. He's done cinematography for many, many Martin Scorsese movies now. He also has worked with Alejandro González Iñárritu before Iñárritu found his muse of Emmanuel Lubezki. But Prieto has done some fantastic stuff. He did Brokeback Mountain, which has gorgeous, gorgeous cinematography. And that's really the comparison that I have that's putting this at number two right now. It's because this is another Western. It's set in Oklahoma. It's set on the plains. We're going to see a lot of those wide, really striking landscapes through this. And Prieto is really good at capturing those, as we saw in Brokeback Mountain. Plus, this is just going to be a very big movie with nominations. I don't think it's going to be very big with wins, but with nominations, it's going to score across the board. And again, we got a tag team here which is pretty famous. Rodrigo Prieto and Martin Scorsese coming together for something that I think is going to look pretty goddamn stunning.
To add to that undeniability, you get to look just one movie before The Irishman for Martin Scorsese with Silence. This was that film's only nomination, was for cinematography, where they collaborate together. But for everyone out there, it's like, oh, maybe he could be double nominated for Barbie. That is a possibility because he's shooting both those movies this year, but I would say this is the one where he's more likely for.
Number three, Oppenheimer, which is being shot by Hoyt van Hoytema, who's done the last few films for Christopher Nolan. His cinematographer used to be Wally Pfister, but has not collaborated with him since The Dark Knight Rises. And since then, it's been Hoyt van Hoytema all the way. Interstellar, Dunkirk, where he got a nomination, as well as Tenet, and now Oppenheimer. The cinematography in this movie looks fucking incredible. Frankly, it looks great. The interplay between the black and white, the color, the IMAX visuals. This movie is going to be huge. It's going to look big. It's going to be, I think, some of the most memorable cinematography of the year. And I think it's going to break through. Not much else to say here. We've seen the footage from this, and it looks great.
There is room to be concerned because if we look at just the last 3 times he's made a film, Nope, Tenet, Ad Astra, all stuff that you would say probably should be in the conversation, but all came up short. But before that, he is a 3-time BAFTA nominee. He is a previous Academy Award nominee, and I think he will become a 2nd-time nominee with this movie.
Especially if the movie's good, right? We both have it in for picture at the moment, and if it is in picture, then it's in here. If it's not in picture, then I drop it from here. But if it's in picture...
Fair enough.
Cinematography comes along with it. At number 4, Poor Things, shot by Robbie Ryan, who previously shot The Favorite for Yorgos Lanthimos as well. This is going to be very similar. It's going to be very Victorian, very big, very beautiful. The production design is going to complement the cinematography, and Robbie Ryan uses lenses and lighting in a really interesting way. Again, if the movie doesn't do very well, which I don't have it in my top 10, but if it really offends people, if it's Babylon level offensive to the Academy, then it won't come along here. But if the Academy likes it in some branches, if it gets really good reviews, then I do see the cinematography coming along here. But I will give a shout out as well. This could also be And, which is another Yorgos Lanthimos movie that's coming out this year. It's rumored that Poor Things is going to go to Cannes and is going to go to Venice. And if And goes to Venice, maybe that's the one that's in here. That's also Robbie Ryan. I wouldn't see 2 Yorgos Lanthimos movies performing well with the Academy in one year, but sure, one could. Or maybe 0 could. But for the moment, Poor Things is at number 4. And at number 5, I have May December, which is shot by Chris Blauvelt, who previously did First Cow and Emma. This is a Todd Haynes movie. He's gotten cinematography nominations for his films in the past, specifically most recently for Carol. But this is not the same person shooting that movie. Having read the script, there's a lot of visually interesting things. There's a lot of stuff using butterflies in this movie that's going to be really stunning to look at. And if he gets good costumes, good production design, the cinematography is going to stand out. And with this cinematographer, Chris Blauvelt, who did First Cow, who works with Kelly Reichardt, he's really good with using colors in the light. And really soft colors, soft light. I think that this movie is going to look pretty freaking great. And that is enough to push it into my top 5. Especially because I have high hopes for this movie in general. I think that this is going to be a big contender. But there's some big ones that aren't in my top 5, which a lot of people are going to be questioning me about, including you, I think.
Yes. There's one major one missing to me, but real quick to touch on May December, I feel like that could definitely be like a Tar-type nomination this year, where it's cinematography that doesn't really jump out the page to you, but when you look deeper at it, it's very impressive, very good work. Sort of thing. But yes, the one that does stand out to me missing here is Dune Part 2. Previous winner, Greg Fraser, he got snubbed last year for The Batman, so there is not like the honeymoon phase, you're coming along every year, so there is room to miss, but I think of Dune Part 2 as a player, which I think we both have it for at the moment. This is probably one of those nominations where it comes along, it just doesn't win.
But hey, wouldn't you say the same thing about Avatar: The Way of Water?
Yes, I would. And
wouldn't you say the same thing about The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers or The Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, where it won the first cinematography, but then it didn't even get nominated for The Two Towers or Return of the King, which might have been an eligibility issue, but at the same time, kind of fucked up that Return of the King swept everything but didn't even get a cinematography nomination.
That is weird.
It's weird. And so with Dune Part 2, my reasoning for having it at number 6 right now is that there's a large chance that the Academy goes, we've seen it before. It's the same stuff. And I guess that's my argument. It's the same stuff. It's the same desert cinematography. I don't see Greg Fraser doing the same thing and getting another nomination.
I think it really comes down to, like with your previous statement of Dune versus the Batman, it's just the nature of the competition of the year that you're in. And yeah. I think this upcoming season has a pretty stacked cinematography lineup because you just listed 6 movies that all look pretty good on paper, but obviously there's only 5 spots. So what else do you have in like your list of 10 that you're like, maybe it could get in, but it's not as strong as these top 6?
Of course, and I've got more than 10, so I'll drop a few. But in the top 10 here, the next one that I have is El Conde, which is the one that I'm very high on. That everyone else will come around to eventually. I think this is a Netflix movie. It's directed by Pablo Larraín. It is a Chilean movie. But here's the thing that has me put this at number 7. The cinematographer of this movie is Ed Lachman. Remember that I just said that Todd Haynes isn't working with his normal cinematographer, the cinematographer that has gotten Oscar nominations for Todd Haynes movies? Well, Ed Lachman is working with Pablo Larraín on El Conde. He's bringing in an American cinematographer who shot Carol, who shot The Virgin Suicides, who shot Far From Heaven. And that has me with this. It sounds really interesting, and I think that there's an opportunity for a lot of darkness and a lot of really interesting interplay between light and shadow. That said, I mean, we had hopes that potentially Claire Mathon could get into the cinematography lineup for Spencer, which was Pablo Larraín's last movie. Pablo Larraín always makes interesting stuff. The question is it going to connect with the Academy? Is it going to be too weird for the Academy? And that is the big question here. But if there's one nomination that this gets, it could be cinematography. Next up, Past Lives, which is shot by Shabir Kirshner, who was the director of photography on Small Axe. We've seen some of the cinematography of this. It might not stand out enough to get the nomination, but that said, the movie is going to be pretty big, which is why it's got to be in that top 10 right here. Number 9, I have Strangers. And again, I think that this is Searchlight's push. I'm going all in on that. I'm going to read the book just to know what happens in this movie so that I can have a little bit more of a view of, should I really be predicting this, or is this a bit of a pipe dream? But that said, the cinematographer on this is Jamie Ramsey, who has only been working for a few years now. This is one of his first big movies, but last year he shot both Living and See How They Run, both of which were, if nothing else, visually really interesting movies, especially Living. I thought that was a stunning movie to look at, both in the production design and the cinematography, mostly the cinematography. And I know you didn't love the movie, Dylan, but I know that you said that cinematography was one of the things that stood out for you about that film.
It did, yeah.
Strangers is one that I'm excited for, and if the movie's big, then the cinematography could come along with it, because it'll be haunting, it'll add to the ghost story. And then finally, at number 10, The Way of the Wind, which is Terrence Malick's new movie, which we know, just from the name Terrence Malick, it is going to look stunning. Now, the cinematographer here is not his usual Emmanuel Lubezki. It is Jorg Widmer, who shot his last movie, A Hidden Life, who also shoots a lot of Wim Wenders movies like Pina or Buena Vista Social Club. So I think that this is possible. I mean, it's Terrence Malick, so we know it's going to look pretty stunning.
Yeah, looking at that list of the other 10 movies you have here, none of them really stand out to me the most. I mean, most of these movies are stuff that we have either underperforming or not as high as everything else that you have in the cinematography lineup. But I guess just because it is David Fincher and his movies usually are visually stunning, The Killer is a possible maybe just like a lone cinematography type movie, but also not something I'm very much going to put faith in until like we get word about it. But another movie that does, at least on paper, look like it should be a player but probably won't be just because Apple has too much, is Napoleon, where just because it is a big war epic that should probably be in the conversation, but if it is like Apple's number 3 or it's just not a very good movie, it probably won't. But I mean, we say that in last year there was 2 critically panned movies that still made their way to cinematography. So
it's true. You can totally get in with a critically panned movie. Now, the one in my list of like side notes that I'm like most interested in is The Zone of Interest, and that's because I heard rumors that they shot this movie entirely with 360-degree cameras. I heard rumors of that. I've heard so many rumors about this fucking movie, which like it just sounds ludicrous. But I don't know. That's the one that I'm like, that sounds weird and interesting.
Speaking of sounding weird and sounding interesting, we have the best sound category, which at least my predictions aren't very weird or very interesting, because at least to me, a lot of these just kind of jump off the paper as like, obviously these are being nominated. And let's go with the man himself, Christopher Nolan, at my number 1 spot currently for Oppenheimer. Yes, I know the complaints of Christopher Nolan movies with the sound mixing, the sound editing. However, I feel like that issue will be solved with this movie. I say that, and the sound mixer of Tenet is also doing the sound mixing for Oppenheimer, so maybe, but also I think that's probably more of a Nolan choice than the mixer themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, Oppenheimer, my number 1. Matt, what are your thoughts about Nolan possibly maybe winning a sound Oscar?
There's a very strong correlation that we've seen for many years between sound and editing. And yes, that broke last year for Everything Ever All at Once, but that does not mean it's going to break again, and it's not going to break again. Sound and editing are going to correlate. And I guess I'll spoil that I'm doing editing next, but I also have Oppenheimer number 1, so I would also have Oppenheimer at number 1 for sound. Now, that said, this relies on the movie being good, and this relies on the sound mixer not being a big fucking dummy when it comes to mixing dialogue, because the issue with a lot of Nolan films, including Interstellar, especially Tenet, is that he prioritizes in epic moments that the music must be louder and must feel, it has to move you and make you feel the music rather than, letting you understand the dialogue. Now, this is a biopic, right? It's not one that has action scenes. So I think if there's any moments that the sound is drowned out, it's going to be for good purpose, right? And that's the thing with Dunkirk as well. Dunkirk had great sound mixing, and it still had that issue of, I can't hear anyone speak. But the purpose of that was it was a war zone. You're not supposed to hear people speak. They're yelling over top of bombs going off. But also, what they were saying wasn't as important to the plot, as I assume it will be in Oppenheimer. So if there are moments where we can't hear them, they better not be saying important things.
The reason why I have Oppenheimer at number 1 is I think the bomb sequence itself is going to elevate this over my number 2, which is Dune Part 2, which the previous movie did win the sound category, but as Matt mentioned last category, it may see a little bit of an underperformance with wins or nominations come this time around. But sound is one I feel pretty safe for a nomination. I just think the grandness and the scope of what Oppenheimer's setting out to do will probably trump it in both sound and editing. But easily, like Matt mentioned, these categories tend to go hand in hand. So our number 1s could become our number 2s once we see Oppenheimer in a few months, or once we get a Dune trailer or something like that. That brings me, though, to number 3, which on paper also has a very good shot at being number 1, and that's The Color Purple. Musicals tend to do very well in this category. We have not seen really how they fare for wins when they're only one category. We saw West Side Story, and that did not win this category. That went to the first Dune. So this could be the real first test of, hey, can a musical win just best sound? Not sound editing, not sound mixing, just sound in general. My number 4 is Killers of the Flower Moon, because you don't have to look very far behind. You look to Power the Dog, and that's the exact same case I make for Killers. You have the Western themes, you have the boots, you have the carts, you have everything like that. The little sound stuff, where it may not be as big, as in your face as a Dune, as a Color Purple, as an Oppenheimer, but it's just so technically well made that I feel like if this is going to be our nomination leader, or one of those very high nominated movies like The Irishman, sound would be one of the ones that comes along with it.
Yeah, I can see Killers of the Flower Moon. I mean, we had Power of the Dog get into this category for very subtle sounds like the wind rustling across the desert, or Benedict Cumberbatch playing with a comb with his thumb. I can totally see Killers of the Flower Moon making it here.
And my number 5 is one where, if I look at my total list of nominations, this would be the only nomination I have it in for, but that would be Ferrari, because race car movies go vroom vroom, and they usually get into sound or editing, or if not both. And just for a lack of a concrete number 5, I'm reaching a little bit to put this one in, but I feel kind of good about it. It's one that even if the movie doesn't perform well, I could see it being a very solid sound player throughout the case of the season. But I also made that case for 13 Lives at this point last year, and we saw how that played out. So this could be a complete swing and a miss, but it's what I'm willing to take at this moment.
You're right that this could be very big, because it is a car movie, and car movie go vroom vroom, and sound branch of Academy go, ooh,
yay.
Yeah, we're voting for that. Oftentimes the best sound is the sound that you don't notice at all, because it just blends in. But the Oscars always go for the most sound. What's the loudest? What is... And so, you take on a car movie, you take on a war movie, you know that you're gonna get a frickin' nomination for it. Like, it just happens that way. And so, yeah, with Ferrari, I can see them getting nominated. The only thing holding it back is that there's a big possibility that this could just be a total unmitigated disaster. It is Michael Mann, who has not had the best track record in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Everything about it feels like red flags.
It does to me as well. That's why this is the only category I have it in for. But at the same time, like I mentioned before, I'm going to list off some of my next in line. None of them feel good enough, and I'd rather take a swing than just play a little bit more safe. But one movie I kind of look to Ferrari to compare it to would be Rush from 2013. Obviously not the same type of scale or anything like that, just another racing movie. Rush failed to make it into the Oscars, but it was very consistent along the awards path of getting into Best Sound. And just because that movie got blanketed by the Academy at whole, it missed on that category. But the BAFTAs, it had 4 nominations, including sound, and a lot of precursors that hit there as well. So maybe Ferrari can overcome that, but probably not. However, looking at my next in line, these are all movies that kind of, like Matt said, are very just bold, big, in your face. We have war movies like Napoleon and Blitz. We have musicals like Wonka and The Little Mermaid. And then we have what my number 6 is, which kind of makes sense but also doesn't, and that's Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. It's playing at Cannes, at least what the reports say, so that is getting a big early word and eyes on this movie. And if it's a good movie, unlike the last Indiana Jones, yeah, sound, come along with it.
It's James Mangold, right?
Ford v Ferrari, right there. One of those is probably our number 5. It's just which one? And I say that, and watch, we come back to this video a year from now, and like there's only one movie that makes it in.
I think sound is one of the categories we'll probably do better at, because you can imagine what the Academy is going to go for just from reading the titles of these movies.
Yeah.
So it just depends on, I guess, what ends up sticking with the Oscars more or less. But let's move on to editing, where I already spoiled it for you guys. I have Oppenheimer at number 1. Now, the reasoning here, yes, is the sound correlation. It's a movie that's going to jump back and forth through time a lot, and that's going to be really fascinating to watch. And if they pull it off, it could be a Dunkirk situation where they just blend timelines in such an interesting way that this just is a shoo-in for best editing. Then at number 2, I have Dune Part 2. You can see this is just going to mirror your list for sound a little bit. And that's, I do have it here because of the sound thing. And I am a bit nervous about Dune Part 2's performance at the Oscars, because I don't see them just giving it every single award that it won last time. Like, that just doesn't seem very likely to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the clear 1 and 2, unless, like we said, one of these movies either gets delayed in the case of Dune, or Oppenheimer is a Tenet. And I think those, if you have anything else at number 1 or 2 right now, you're either predicting one of those two things to happen, or you're just crazy.
And at number 3, I've got The Color Purple. And this one, again, I keep coming back to Blitz Bazawule, who is directing The Color Purple. He does music videos for Beyonce. There's going to be visual creativity in this. There's going to be a lot of really dynamic choices, and the editing is going to be very strong. We know the sound is going to be strong because it's a musical, and the editing will be too. Now, that said, they've snubbed some musicals in this category in recent years in weird ways. West Side Story should have been in editing, and it could have won. Like, it did win at other awards bodies, and it just didn't show up here. So it's possible Color Purple gets snubbed here, but at the moment, from this far out, I'm just going to say it's in here because it's in sound. And then number 4, this is where I'm going to get into the possible Best Picture winners needing an editing nomination. And that's where I've got The Holdovers, which I kind of think is going to be the runner-up by the end of the year. This is the Banshees of Inisherin spot in here, where it's a film that doesn't shout its editing out loud, but it still gets in because it's very solidly edited, and people just like it enough to give it the nomination. And at number 5, I've got Dumb Money.
Yeah.
Dumb Money, Craig Gillespie, who got an editing nomination for I, Tonya. Obviously, he's not the editor, but his film got an editing nomination, and did Cruella. Both films are in your face, fast-moving, bombastic. I'm stealing your word. It's my word this season. It's my word now. But yeah, Dumb Money is going to be fast, in your face, fun, really driven by that editing. It's also a huge ensemble piece with a giant ensemble who don't interact, so it's going to be a lot of cutting back and forth. I get flashbacks to The Big Short and flashbacks to I, Tonya, of course, and that's why it's my number 5 right here.
We have 2 movies different from our 5, but we have the same number 1 and 2 and the same number 5. Just the same reasons you made for the movies you had are what my alternatives are, but they're the next 2 on your list, so I'll let you talk about them.
Yeah, cool. Then I'll go with my next one, which is Past Lives. And Past Lives has dropped quite a lot for me, unfortunately. It's my number 3 in picture at the moment. I'm nervous about Past Lives. It's starting to feel more and more like Call Me By Your Name. I will not bend. This is not the farewell. This is getting in. And then at number 7, I've got Killers of the Flower Moon. This one feels like an editing snub to me. Feels like The Fablemans, which I said all year long, this could be snubbed. This is an easy snub. And I kept it in my top 5 because I was like, oh, I think that there's a good argument for it not to be snubbed, but it could be snubbed. And Killers feels like that. It feels like this is going to be where we start to see it's weak. People are going to say, oh, this is winning Best Picture, this is winning Best Picture, this is winning Best Picture. And then we're going to get to the nominations, and it's going to be missing in a few major places. And this is going to be one of them. And it's going to be the first sign that Killers, surprise, surprise, is not winning Best Picture, because it never was. And that's why I don't have it in my top 5, but it's close. It's close. It's a number 7.
I would have Killers or Color Purple be my number 5. I'm not sure which one I'm going to lean to. Killers makes sense to get snubbed because it's going to be over 3 hours, and we have seen those movies usually don't get into editing. But at the same time, if it's still like the Best Picture number 2, if it's the Banshees, in my eyes at least, it could be in that conversation. And then for the opposite, I have Past Lives in over the holdovers because, like what you said, the number 2 in picture or the Best Picture winner, it kind of needs that nomination. So Past Lives for me is still up there at the top just because I don't want to move off of it until I have like course of action. Like once the movie comes out, if the reception isn't as beloved as it was at Sundance, then yeah, I'll hop off of it. But for the time being, until at least that movie opens or can start or something, I'm going to hold on to that. But Dumb Money's one I really like. We've seen that they love this type of movie. Obviously, this is not an Adam McKay movie, but it's an Adam McKay-esque type movie. And Don't Look Up got in, The Big Short got in, Vice got in, Dumb Money, it's probably going to be in if it's like for real.
Yeah, and of course, I, Tonya is an even closer thing because it's the same director. But yeah, I guess for Killers, you mentioned if it's number 2, it gets in. But I think that it's going to be the one that everyone says all year long. They're like, oh, this is my placeholder. Like, it's just my number 1 for now until like proven wrong, and then it's not gonna be number 1. They're gonna be like, oh well, it's number 2. It's the Fablemans all over again, where we were like, oh, it's number 2, it's number 2, it's number 2, and then suddenly it was number 7, and we're like, okay, it's just not happening anymore.
Well, like I said before, we don't have long to wait on Killers because if the rumors are true, there'll be eyes on it in like a month. So we'll have that reaction a lot earlier than what we had for The Fablemans, because who knows, this could come out and people are like, this is Scorsese's best. I know they said that for The Fablemans as well, but like we knew The Fablemans one wasn't for real, and I feel like international audiences are probably be a little bit more like truthful, I guess, for Killer's like real performance than the TIFF audience was for Fablemans, because Fablemans very much struggled at international bodies like the BAFTA.
At number 8, I've got May December here. This one I only have in my top 10 because I think it could potentially make a play for that second place for Best Picture. I don't think it's going to win Best Picture, but I think it could end up being Banshees at best. Banshees or Power of the Dog. And if it is Banshees or Power of the Dog, then it's in the top 5. But at the moment, I don't quite have it there, especially because it doesn't have a distributor yet, which worries me. And we've talked about that a lot. But at number 9, I have The Killer, David Fincher's new movie, which I don't have in any categories right now, but the closest I have it is to editing, because David Fincher's movies, if nothing else, get that editing prize. He won back-to-back editing prizes for The Social Network and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and The Killer, even though it doesn't have the profile of an Academy movie, being an action movie about a hitman, it doesn't have the profile for many other categories. It has the profile for editing, for sure, editing. But still, I think it's going to underperform. David Fincher doesn't need to get Oscar nominations, which is why it's at number 9. And finally, at number 10, I've got Strangers, which, again, this is one that I'm a lot higher on than a lot of people. And I think it's going to be very slow, very beautiful, very moving. This could be Tar. It could be a Tar nomination for this movie.
See, I was going to say May December would be more of a Tar nomination, but I think The Strangers could work for that case as well. I like your 10. I mean, I feel like that's what we're going to say about each other's lineups for a while until we actually lay eyes and get more word about stuff. But yeah, the only other things I would add really to the conversation is just because of the possible sound chance. Maybe there is Mission Impossible. Maybe there is Napoleon. Maybe there is Ferrari. Mm-hmm. But there's all stuff that probably aren't going to hit over there, so they probably won't hit in the editing category either. But the one that I guess I would be most inclined to say maybe it should be in the 10 would be Poor Things, but again, I know you're lower on it than I am,
Yeah.
so it makes sense for it not to be in your 10.
Well, that's the thing. Strangers is my number 10, but if Poor Things is the push by Searchlight, then by all means, slap Poor Things in there instead. Because The Favorite got that nomination, right? We see that they like his style. Let's move to our next category, our final category that we're going to be talking about today. You're taking on Best Visual Effects.
And Dune fans, you can feel better. This is going to be your win, maybe for the whole award show, but at least on this episode today, because you do trump Oppenheimer in this category. That's my 1. That's my 2. Dune 2 really has no reason to lose this category. It's probably going to be like a Way of Water type sweep across the whole season. Maybe not if Oppenheimer does something really, really cool with the explosion, but still, Dune's probably going to trump it just because the first Dune did, and there's no reason for the second one, which is probably even more impressive on the visual side, to not win the award.
Absolutely. No, you're completely right. And the difference here is Dune is all visual effects, whereas Oppenheimer has a bomb go off, right?
Yeah.
So Oppenheimer could even be snubbed out of this category. I'm not going to predict that right now, but this is one where we can look a year out and say the only reason Dune wouldn't win is if it was moved to next year.
I mean, I guess going for the Oppenheimer could be snub. This branch does like practical effects. They're not scared to not nominate stuff like that. I mean, we saw last year Top Gun Maverick get in here. I think 1917 got in here, where a lot of the stuff was actually done. It's just the little background stuff that helps encapsulate it. But I mean, we have the big top 2. Marvel, as we saw last year, they don't even need the VES precursor. They're still going to get a movie in. I right now have that movie being Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, but who knows? The Marvels could come out right before award season gets started in November and could be a player, but I'm going to lean more towards Guardians.
Guardians makes sense. It's going to be their biggest movie of the year. It's going to connect with people more. I think the only argument for the Marvels is that it comes out later. But
yeah, that's exactly what my point was. It came out later, and if it gets very good reviews, maybe that carries over in the goodwill. Hey, we really like this. It's the most recent one. Let's throw it in. But there's no reason not to pick Guardians at this moment. My number 4 is Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny. I feel like even if it misses sound, even if it misses editing, it's getting in here.
Yeah. Agreed. It's also probably getting in score. This movie's going to be pretty loved, I think. And yeah, Indiana Jones makes sense for number 4 here. This top 4, I think, is unshakable at this moment.
Yeah, I would say this top 4, but changing Guardians just to be the Marvel slot, but most likely Guardians is unchangeable. And I would say in this order as well: Dune, Oppenheimer, Guardians, Indiana Jones. Then is where we get to number 5, in which if certain movies do come out, like Blitz, like Napoleon, I think they can make a play for this. However, I am leaning more towards the new Mission Impossible movie. I know they don't have a great track record for Oscar nominations. If I'm remembering correctly, no Mission Impossible movie has ever been nominated. So it would be weird to get in now, but also now makes the most sense coming off of Top Gun Maverick, their love of Tom Cruise, everything like that. This is probably be the biggest, if not the biggest, a top 3 movie for the summer. It's going to dominate, and the visual effects, while maybe more practical like an Oppenheimer, like a Top Gun Maverick, could be solid enough to get its way in, because if you look at the next in line type of stuff, if you take away Blitz, if you take away Napoleon, you have the other big superhero movies like The Flash, Marvels, Ant-Man, Shazam, Aquaman. Probably none of them are getting in here. They're like the Jurassic Worlds, where maybe they make the short list, but they're not actually getting the nomination. You have Barbie and you have Wonka, possibly, but also there's not enough there, I think, that would get them into this nomination. And the only other thing that really leaves that with, for me at least, is The Little Mermaid. But the reactions to the visual effects so far scream, no way this gets in. So I think the top 5 feel pretty good. I'm trying to remember, in 2020, did The Lion King live action get a visual effects nomination?
Yes, it did. It did
So
indeed.
that would be the case for Little Mermaid being number 6. Is if Lion King can get in, why can't Little Mermaid?
Well, and I guess the thing I'd say is it's not the visual effects' fault that The Little Mermaid looks scary as shit. It's the design.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's just that the fish looks so goddamn scary. The visual effects look really good and really clean. But the design of how the fish look, like Flounder is an abomination. It's terrifying.
Yeah, so I would say out there, the top 5 feel pretty good. Little Mermaid being your number 6 feels pretty good. And after that, take your pick.
I feel like we always know what's going to win this category, or at least we have a really good hunch of what's going to win, and it's everything else that makes the race really interesting. I'm going to say I don't think Mission Impossible will be number 5. That's the one thing I disagree with on your list. I don't think I even have Mission Impossible in my top 10 because the movies are so reliant on actual stunts. And yeah, they do some background replacement. Like, I remember in Fallout, the biggest visual effect in there was that they turned the environment that Tom Cruise was actually doing a halo jump into a storm. But otherwise, you know, they're pretty light on the visual effects. They really like to take pride in the fact that they did it all. But I guess that was the argument that people had against Top Gun Maverick last year, and it still got a nomination. So,
Yeah, like I said, I just don't really know what to put here because I don't feel good putting Little Mermaid in, even though The Lion King did get in. But I just don't know what else to do. So by default, I have Mission Impossible getting that first nomination. More so of like, hey, we like this franchise. We like this movie. We want to recognize you because there's not really anywhere else to do it, especially if Indiana Jones is taking away the possible sound or editing type nominations. This is really the only spot you have with the current makeup of the Academy to recognize a Mission Impossible movie.
but that brings us to the very end of our predictions for today. Make sure you drop a comment. Let us know what we missed. Let us know what you agree with, what you want to fight us on. And as always, thank you so much for joining us and for watching.
But until next time, my name is Dyl.
And my name is Matt, and this is Fantasy Filmball.